Oh, very good. We're live. Awesome. Well, welcome everybody to CubeCon, the inaugural CubeCon. And my name's John Terrill. I'm one of the organizers. I'm also Cultic Cube in various places. And we have a panel today in which we're going to discuss data-driven cube design. And I've got some people who know something about this topic and who are much smarter than I in many arenas here. So let me introduce our panelists, and then I can have you say some words about yourselves as well. So on the end we've got Andy Mangold.
Hello.
And Anthony Mattox.
Thanks for having us. Really great to be here. Excited to be at the first CubeCon. We've been waiting so long.
I know. It's been so long. There's even a song about it, I believe. And Parker Lamascus.
Hi. Thanks for having us, John.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for coming. This is wonderful. So you all are Lucky Paper, and maybe you all can, talk some about how your interest in content creation and so on has engages with your interest in Cube and in using different kinds of analytical tools to think about Cube. But I wonder if we might go down the line and each of you talk some about how you think about using math with Cube design and where you got started in that journey. So Andy, you want to lead off?
Yeah. First, I do want to say that there's a fourth member of Lucky Paper, Jet Crowdis, who is not here today, couldn't make CubeCon. He's in medical school, becoming a doctor, helping the world. So a lot of our sort of initial data pursuits were started by Jet, and so he's a big part of what we do at the website, even though he couldn't be here. It's not just all three of us. Anyway, as John said, my name is Andy. I am not, strictly speaking, a math person. I went to art school. I majored in graphic design, but I have done a lot of work in data visualization specifically, and I'm very interested in design as a utilitarian tool more so than as a tool of ornamentation or decoration, which is just another way of saying I'm not good at making things look cool, but I'm pretty good at making them solve a problem, and so that's what I focus on. So my interest in data visualization and in how we use math to better ourselves in cube design is around how we can contextualize the right information to actually enhance cube design and use it as a tool and not rely on it as the sort of gospel.
I also
which is
think
hard.
That you're pretty good at making things look pretty cool, though.
Oh, I'm glad you think they're cool.
Don't sell yourself short. Yeah, awesome. Anthony?
So I have a similar background to Andy. We actually met in art school, but took a slightly different direction. I ended up teaching myself a lot about computer programming and sort of using computers to make art, learning about systems and systems that generate different kinds of visualizations, as well as data visualization in a more traditional sense. How do we take a bunch of data and information and make it expressible and tell the story of that data and extract patterns from it? And then from there, we've both been working in technology to solve these kinds of problems continuously. And I think that I'll speak for both of us that we just love systems design more than graphic design and anything like that, thinking about the whole perspective of how things interact and function together and how we can use data to understand systems better.
I mean, we're cube designers here.
Exactly. The nerdiest part of the nerdiest little community.
I mean, systems design is what we're all engaged in doing at some level, it seems to me, right? Working on cubes. That's awesome. You've taken that systems design interest and pushed it in still more awesome directions.
All right, so I'm Parker, and in my day job, I'm a mechanical engineer. And over the past few years, I've worked on everything from optimizing manufacturing like assembly lines from a data-driven perspective, all the way to what I do currently, which is work in a research lab on wind turbines and lubricant technologies. So it's much less interesting than cubes. And however, I still like doing the programming and the math and thinking about magic as a system and as a physical system specifically. And that's led me to be really interested in the ways that I can fuse what I've learned in engineering with this hobby. So.
Okay, productive confusion.
Yeah.
That's very good. Great. I'm John Terrill, and I also do not have a background in math at all. I have a background in literature. I'm an English professor. But in the process of exploring cube design, I've become increasingly interested in different analytical tools that one might use to learn new things about environments and design still awesomer environments for people. And so I've learned a lot from all of you all and my conversations with you and from the work that you've done. Learned a lot from people like my KubeCon colleague Gwen Decker, who's the Cube Cobra guru. So I've dabbled in some of these arenas. I've been pleased to get some data from WotC about how people have interacted with a cube on MTGO of my design, and Parker helped me enormously in working through some of that data. That's super cool. I wonder if we might, before we get into the latest tools that you all have been working on or thinking about, maybe we might take a step back and think about the tools that have been available to us historically. When I got started with Cube at the outset, I was using an Excel spreadsheet to chart my cube.
Which spreadsheets are still great. Spreadsheets still work.
Spreadsheets are still
Justin
great.
Parnell's still doing it.
Yeah, it can be done.
Sicko, if you ask me, but he's doing it.
Yeah, right. And I would maintain things like mana cost of spells on the spreadsheet, and then I could do things that felt clever to me, like sort and chart the mana cost of stuff, come up with a curve for the cube. What are some other tools that people have used historically to analyze their cube in terms of data?
I mean, I think these are the biggest ones. Cube Tutor was sort of the original place that, I think in a lot of ways brought the Cube community together and sort of shaped the community in a way, because without it, how do you really have a community at all?
Yeah.
And just being able to move from an Excel spreadsheet, which I love spreadsheets and use them as often as, well, I'm always excited to use a spreadsheet. But when we can take a tool that doesn't take that amount of, setup that each individual has to do repeatedly and, manual copying over potentially of metadata about your cards, but instead can automatically pull in all the different aspects and just allow everyone to see that same view of their cube is extremely powerful. And, we're probably going to go and talk about these really high level detailed kind of analysis, but the basics are so critical of just being able to sort your cube and view the sort of distribution of mana cost, the distribution of colors. That's critical, and we can't really do that higher level analysis until we have this sort of fundamental shared language about talking about things. And of course, now in succession to Cube Tutor, we now have Cube Cobra, which offers the same and many more new tools and analytical tools.
Right.
It's also interesting to me, like, there's a sense in which Cube Cobra and Cube Tutor before it provide access to a vast repository of data just by giving a single designer awareness of everybody else.
Absolutely.
Like, if I were doing this on a spreadsheet by myself, and in the early days of my own cube when I was doing that, I had no idea what other people considered to be fun archetypes, or I had to go digging really deep and make a dedicated search of it. Yeah. Now it's just at my fingertips. I think that's powerful.
It's interesting, and I think I'm often critical that a lot of the tools that we use now have been moved to the web and moved to being sort of like social by default, which I think in a lot of other spaces is kind of clunky. I don't need my Venmo to be shared with everybody, but it is actually fundamental to cubes, because cube is a social activity. I'm not just designing my cube and then hopefully I'm not just designing and then playing with it by myself at home, but I'm actually going to take this and interact with other people. And so starting that interaction with, let's talk about the design together, being able to share it, being able to have other people simulate drafts and get a sense of how it's going to play is really critical.
Yeah. And overall, that I think is a big net positive for cube design as a creative practice. But I think there are costs. I think as soon as you have any sort of central repository, that will naturally kind of encourage more of the same thing. And there's as a web designer, which is what I am now, there's very small decisions that are made on the part of Gwen or people that make Cube Cobra or Ben before with Cube Tutor that I think have a big effect on what people actually do with their designs. So even just showing the most popular cubes on the homepage, right? Like what that tells somebody that is the website that's new, that's like, what is a cube? They're most likely going to see one of the most popular cubes, and whatever biases are inherent in what's possible in cube design just get further entrenched. Yeah. And you also end up with this place where, I actually think one thing that maybe those of us that are very invested in cube design assume that is not true is that a lot of people want to design cubes. I actually think a lot of people just want a cube. And so what they do is they like, give me a list for a good cube. I just want a good cube list. And maybe I'll tweak it if I like have particular desires. But I think the average person is not as interested in diving deep into like the weeds of designing a novel environment. And so when you have any of these websites that treat all of these cubes as equals, as they should, you have a lot of people that just kind of like copied a list, made a change or two, that's their cube. And I don't mean to denigrate that at all. It's just, it's a different thing than somebody that, like you're describing, Parker, if you didn't have access to these tools, you would be alone in your like Excel spreadsheet. I would love to see the cube designs that would come from the same people that we see on Cube Cobra if they were alone working on their spreadsheets. I think they'd be so much more novel and interesting, to be honest.
No, that's quite a counterfactual. Yeah.
It's funny, and I just like, you've just exploded my brain because I've just been learning a lot about extinction and sort of diversity of species. And it's funny how in both that and in cube design, I feel like isolation versus connectivity can both create diversity in different ways. And in a way, bring everything together, making this information accessible to everybody in the same way that we're transferring species all across the globe is a threat to diversity, because everybody can just say, well, that's the most effective idea. That idea is going to spread. But another
everything is a lanternfly or a great white shark, and everything else dies.
I don't know how effective great white sharks are these days, but exactly. On the other hand, bigger spaces, rainforests, actually lend more diversity because you can find niches once we actually have this more textured space. So I think that's what we're seeing now, is this proliferation of different ideas and kinds of cubes after everybody has sort of been like, okay, we could do this vintage cube, but now what else can we do? And where can we develop new ecological niches?
The fact that that clearly has been done visibly so many times, I think more people feel free to be like, well, they want to express themselves. They want some unique aspect to the thing they're creating. I think that's like a fundamental thing about being any kind of creative person, being an artist of any kind. And so, of course, if they feel like the classic vintage cube or a powerful legacy cube archetype has been done and done over and over again, there's nothing new to say there, then they may feel more free to make the devoid cube or make the turbo cube or whatever kind of novel environment they might design.
Yeah, this is true. But then on the other hand, there are those people for whom the MTGO vintage cube is real cube. We had this conversation on Twitter the other day when I had somebody who
got so mad, John.
Somebody was complaining that the community spotlight cubes on MTGO are preventing this person from playing real cube.
Right, which is
vintage cube.
I think that's an interesting just challenge of language, that, you know, that experience that they're interested in is exciting and real and valid, and we should all enjoy that. These other experiences are all equally valid, and it's just a matter of, should we label all of this cube or should we just label this one portion cube? And I'm definitely of the opinion that like we should all celebrate this as one sort of vast creative expression,
which this event is going to be great for. I mean, anybody watching the stream now should know that all of the featured cubes all weekend that are going to be on stream tomorrow, on stream on Sunday as well. Today's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah. All
the cubes on all the days. There's a wide variety of environments on offer to show what is possible within the space of cube design. Even that's just a small sliver of what's totally possible, but it's a lot broader than I think a lot of people have been exposed to.
Yeah. That's true. So I don't know. You all are making good points about ways in which having cube lists be quite accessible and quite public can be beneficial, but I mean, there's something to be said as well for having one's own cherished thing and one's not necessarily consulting other lists. This was more the model in the past, I think, than it is today, where cube, and people may have had a sort of different approach, a different mentality about cube, I think, whereby cube was often more of a hermetic project. It was something that was extremely personal. It is still extremely personal, but something that one's working on in one's own space, and people were even jealous of cube lists sometimes, wouldn't want to exchange them with other people on the message boards.
Like a secret recipe that you're trying to crack.
Yeah, right. So I'm sure there are still people who think in this way. I think this gets to an issue as well, whereby there are people who privilege intuition in cube design, like having their own personal vision, and this should be the main focus of their cube design and should guide all the decisions that they make as they're making changes and tinkering with stuff. Do you still think intuition has a role in designing cube? Intuition born of experience and playtesting and artistry and so on?
I absolutely do. I mean, I think that all of this data is extremely useful. I mean, when I say all this data, I mean, now we have public lists and we have ways to analyze it. We can look at an individual cube and see the distribution of mana cost, things like that. And then we can also look in aggregate. What are the typical distribution of these kinds of effects, or what are even just the top cards? What's the top most popular cube look like in an idealized way? All that data is useful, but it's only useful if you're trying to answer a specific question, which we don't have in cube design. We could have sort of niche questions about like what kind of balance of removal will create this kind of gameplay, things like that, and we can use it to answer these specific questions. But ultimately, cube is a creative process. The question is, what kind of experience do you want? What kind of gameplay do you want to have? What kind of creative product do you want to create? And so data can support that and inform details, but it can't paint the whole picture. It can't ask the question for you. So in that sense, I think intuition is totally critical, because it's all about your own personal goals as a designer.
Okay. I feel like there are almost conflicting motivations at play here. I think it should be said that Magic attracts a particularly nerdy type of person, and Cube, perhaps the most invested way to engage with Magic.
Is there a better word than nerdy? A sort of people with an analytical or...
There's no shade on nerdy. Nerd is not a derogatory term.
We're just nerds. That's great.
But there's a lot of people that tend to like cube design and also like some form of working with computers, of computer programming, of data analysis. And so I think there's this interesting trend where, because that's the tool that so many of us have, it's like, well, how can I use this tool to improve my hobby? When it's interesting because in another light, it's like, well, why would I ever try to like associate numbers with this, right? Like it's fundamentally a very like social human experience. And I think there is some level to which assigning a number to anything, there's an inherent desire then to like optimize that number. And it becomes about this quantitative analysis as opposed to the qualitative analysis of like, was it fun to play this cube? Did you enjoy casting this card? Did you feel like you could win? Like, forget what your actual record is in 20,000 matches over 10 years, that we can just like simulate. Did it feel like it was a close game? Did you feel like there were choices you made that were relevant?
Right.
And I think it's a real argument to be made that like the creative cube design as an art form, as a creative expression, gets very little attention compared to the data side of it, because it's much harder to talk about. It's something that's not as easy to assign some value to, whereas we all inherently have this value assigned to like, oh, I analyze this many drafts and I have this amazing data I want to like share with people. Again, I think all the data can be a valuable tool if used in the right way being different for every person, right? Whatever they're trying to optimize for. But it's interesting to me that like very few other creative pursuits, like art, like uses...
I'm gonna disagree with you here.
I mean, very few by number, right? Like there's not a lot of, musicians that are, making a bunch of albums and like playing them for people and getting the feedback from the people they're playing them for and being like, what do you think of this? And then tweaking it. Like, and that's essentially what we're doing with our cube. We like make a cube, we play with people, we get like, that's not how most artists work. Like the idea of the auteur, like a person that has a creative vision that wants to realize it, there's a reason that's an archetype, and we don't see the same kind of creative work produced by groups of people or produced by committee. We see that produced by an individual. And I think that a lot of that gets minimized in all these conversations because that's not the kind of person that this tends to attract. This tends to attract the kind of person that is very interested in systems and analysis and, quantifying things, but there's a lot of biases inherent in that.
But I think something critical that you touched on is the fact that when you do have a concrete question, and so let's apply this to playing Magic versus designing cubes, designing for Magic. When you're playing Magic, there is a concrete question: how do I win the most? And so you can use data to compare deck lists, compare win rates, and answers to a question, or at least approach an answer of a specific question. But you can't improve the win rate of your cube. It's always going to be 50% barring draws. So like what you are trying to prove is entirely what you said. It's entirely about perception. It's about, did people feel like they had agency? Did people feel like they could win? So you can't necessarily optimize that through numbers. You have to use your intuition and your qualitative experience, people's feedback and experience of, was it fun for them?
Yeah. Like I've said before on our podcast, you could tell me that Ragavan in my cube has an outsized win percentage. If the game's won when you have it on turn one, it's like 80% of the games. And you could show me like statistically that it's a huge outlier in terms of power level, and then justify based on my stated cube design goals that doesn't belong here. But I don't care. I don't.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not living in that world. I'm not playing the cube 150,000 times, as a time traveling supercomputer. I'm playing it with my friends, and my friends have a good time. That's the end result I care about, not this abstract end result that is represented by all of this
Right.
underlying data analysis.
And that suggestion that a card has an outsized win rate is a problem is sort of baking in the assumption that every card should have a 50% win rate, or making some kind of assumption like that.
Yeah, that's why I said based on my cube design goals, which is
right.
like
The cube design
minimize
goal
power outliers,
probably should be everybody has fun. But I mean, again, you could design a cube that
Well, that might not be
way
the goal,
approach to
Your
design
goal
it
could
is
have the most, like,
the misery
less-
cube.
Yeah, you
the
could
most
design a cube
beautiful
and just
card,
say
the cards you think are the most beautiful, and then got a museum of these
Right.
gorgeous art, Or I mean, you mentioned auteur theory with regard to cinema, and that actually seems like a fine metaphor for how cube designers often behave. It's not many cubes that are designed by committee. Firstly, I think, right? Most people do think of themselves as like the writer and the director and the author of
So
their.
the curator, I feel like, is what people.
Right,
I mean, we hear cube curator.
Yeah, we hear the
you know.
term cube curator, and I mean the auteur is creating something that's a translation of their own vision for sure, but typically a goal still. I mean, Jean-Luc Godard wants to make movies that people are going to come see, even if they're becoming increasingly idiosyncratic, which is just to say that the auteur can be interested in audience reception, just as we can be interested in player reception and try to, take that into account in our design.
I also think it's true. It's not that I disagree with what's been said already, but
You should. It'd be more interesting conversation.
it's just that a game, which a cube is, it's a game of drafting, and then you play. Yeah, we can agree on that. Creates an experience for the players, and it can be that like data can help create an experience that wouldn't be possible otherwise. For like, you've used the analogy of artists and movies and so on, but I want to use a slightly different analogy of the space race. Prior to the space race, mathematicians and scientists were limited by the computing power that they could output. And after some technological development, suddenly we could feed numbers into a computer, and we could develop algorithms to get many computations performed in record time, unbelievable speeds of computation. And that enabled the tools, rockets and so on, to go further than before.
Yeah.
Now that still requires intuition. The scientist still needs to look at the computer on the Apollo 13 mission and realize the output of this computer is wrong. I need to, sound the alarm.
Or more importantly, know what to put into the computer in the first place, which
That's
is
also true.
an act of human intervention with some subjectivity and guessing and hypothesizing.
And so intuition is incredibly valuable, but data can be a tool.
Yeah.
And that can unlock new potential, even in an art form that is, at its core subjective.
Well, it's funny. I mentioned these dual perspectives, and I actually think that part of why I love cube design so much is that it is in this rarefied air of this beautiful combination of art and science, I think, which is like other things like cooking for me are in that space, where it's like science is really important, but at the end of the day, all that matters is that this thing tastes good. It's not that it's like chemically perfect or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, being in this space and having that tension, I think there's a fundamental tension between the like artistic voice of like singular vision and the scientific approach of everything you said makes total sense, right? Like that additional power allowed humans to create way more, right? And I mean, computer, bicycle for a mind, blah, 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 right? Like we all know that our tools have a huge impact on what we're able to create creatively. And the analytic tools are no different, right? Like the more we know about our cubes, the more empowered we should theoretically be to make the most creative and interesting decisions and realize our artistic vision as much as possible, even if those processes fundamentally may feel kind of at odds because they're driving in different directions.
Yeah. So we've talked about how tools like first Cube Tutor and then Cube Cobra have allowed people to see lots and lots of cubes, and this may inform their design. This can be super useful. You all have been working on tools that may allow you to aggregate lots of cubes in interesting ways and learn things from that experience, or to aggregate different kinds of input from cube designers and what they're excited about and learn things from that. So I wonder if you could talk about some of these awesome things that you all have been working on in this space. Maybe Parker, you could lead off.
Yeah, so I can start. One challenge with aggregating data from cube designers is that it's not really possible to, let's say a new set comes out, Dominaria United is the most recent release. It's not possible to analyze that set of cards or to log into Cube Tutor and Cube Cobra and like gather some data on what the best cube staples from Dominaria United are. That's just, it doesn't even apply. The question,
what's the best spice?
Yeah, it depends, right? But something we can objectively measure, and then we can aggregate that data and analyze it really effectively, is community perception about the best spice. Mm-hmm. So we can't prove the best spice is cinnamon, but we can say 80% of Americans use more cinnamon than any other spice, or whatever. I made that up. That's not real. I'm not spreading quote.
Quote, Mark
no,
Lamascus.
Don't pumpkin spice.
And so that's what we've done with what we call our set prospective surveys. And we have to give credit to Jet here, who's not present, but who began these surveys. And that's what we're doing. We're measuring community perception about a new set for Dominaria United, which is a name I can't really say well. We collected data on what cards curators were testing, and I think we got over 300 responses off the top of my head. And we also obtained how they rated those cards subjectively. Not necessarily power level, but maybe they rated a card highly based on its art, or on the fact that it wasn't a high power level, so it could stick around long term without annoying people, or some other factor.
Right, or maybe it's a critical sort of addition to some kind of package that doesn't quite work yet, but it's sort of adding support.
Yeah, maybe
to
they
a
wanted
theme
a new
love to try out.
synergy piece.
Yeah, I think the critical thing there is that we do have tools to sort of evaluate the power level in some sense of cards. Things like 17 lands, that when a new set comes out, we quickly see what the most powerful cards are, at least in certain sets. And you can roughly kind of abstract that to other sets, although context matters a lot, obviously. But what we don't have is that sort of subjective taste of what do people enjoy, what do people really want to put into a cube. And so that's the question we're trying to answer with these set surveys.
I will say, too, I have complicated feelings about the set surveys, right? It was part of why Lucky Paper started in the first place 3+ years ago, was that we wanted a place to publish Jet's first article. Like, the website started because Jet was like, he sent me a PDF he had generated in LaTeX, right? He was like, I'm going to post this PDF to the subreddit. Will you proofread it for me? And I was like, this is a great article. I think it belongs in some more permanent, more accessible space than a PDF on a subreddit that's going to be unfindable in 2 weeks. And so that was a big part of the motivation. And the set surveys were just like the obvious thing to do. It was like, well, we are all in these spaces and we care about what cards people are testing. It was like, that was the clear, straightforward thing to do. But for all the reasons we've talked about, there is no one best card out of a cube. And so I have kind of conflicting feelings about putting them in a list, a ranked list, and saying, here's the top, here's the second, here's the third. Like,
that is true. I mean, I feel like we do always try and provide that caveat that they are a useful resource for people looking back. Like, hey, I missed the last couple sets. I want to update my cube. Where should I start looking?
They're very practical in that sense.
Entry point. Like, hey, if you only have 10 minutes, if you're only going to look at 10 cards, these might be the 10 that are most interesting to most people. But you're absolutely right that doesn't mean that they're going to be the most interesting.
I mean, it's a solution that makes tons of sense. It's science brain. It's like, of course, we can measure this. We can display it in a way that's clear. We can, put any kind of caveat or whatever we want around it to make it clear it's not an evaluation of power level or whatever. But the artist in me is like, it's like naming the color of the year.
What's the best color?
Yeah, exactly. It's like it feels like it's not only not serving that goal, but it may even, in some small way, be kind of detrimental to the diversity of cube design that we care so much about. And honestly, I feel like so much of what we've done, like you mentioned that like the cube map, for example, could be a tool for analysis. And honestly, I think I speak for all of us when I say that we made that as a way to show the diversity of the format. We've heard people talking so much about, cube is this, cube is that. And to be able to literally point at a thing and say, no, that thing you say cube is, that's a little tiny peninsula over here, right? And there's all this other stuff going on in this space. That I think is the main reason, just to celebrate the diversity of what this format can be, and to make it real in the sense that we can show it to you in a picture, right?
That's true.
You can tell people, like, I crunched the numbers, and only 17% of cubes that you're describing actually fit this definition or whatever. That's not as visceral as looking at an image, right?
Well, let's back up half a step maybe, and for those who may not be familiar with the cube map, you should check it out firstly on
You're much
Paper.
better at promoting our website than we are. Thank you, John.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. But maybe we could start with Parker again. Could you give a little background to the project and describe what it does?
I'll do my best. I'm not exactly sure where to start here, but
It's a lot.
there are 28,000 Magic cards,
Something like that.
A lot. And you can imagine that almost like a space. of 28,000 dimensions. We live in a 3D world. This is 28,000.
Like how you're like, this is complicated. I'm going to immediately jump to imagine a 28,000 dimensional space.
Yeah. Okay. So like a cube.
All the Doctor Who listeners are doing, or Doctor Who watchers are doing fine.
They're doing fine. A cube is like 300 to 500 to 700 cards out of that 28,000. And so it's just like a location in this space. And then another cube is over here, and a third, and a fourth. And
but again, these are all in some sort of space you can't possibly imagine, because you might be picturing 3D space, but it's not. It's more.
It's more
a
3D
lot more
than 3D. Yeah.
Think Donnie Darko, but way more.
Yeah. It's tough to wrap your mind around.
Yeah.
But what the cube map is taking that object in the same way that holding up a guitar or something casts a shadow on a table. So you've taken a 3D object and now it's a 2D shadow or projection in technical terms. We have taken a projection of that 28,000 dimensional space, and projected it into a computer screen. And that's essentially the cube map. It's a shadow of the diversity of cube.
Right.
And if you turn it just right, you can see just how much variation there is within that space.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, in layman's terms, it's a map where every cube is a dot, and the dots that are closer together are generally more similar.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of complicated math behind that, and a lot of reasons why it's not always more similar in the same ways you might expect. But it's a way to, using only the cards contained within the cube and no other metadata, no other intervention on our part to say, well, let's group these over here and group these over here. We're not doing anything other than saying, here are all these cards in these cubes. Show us what this looks like, right? Show us this projection. One of many valid projections. Like, you can shine that light at that object from many different angles and get many different shadows out of it. So we're only still getting a piece of this idea, but it's better than what we had before, which was nothing. I mean, we had no visualization of what the cube world looked like before, the cube community was. And so, like, I think a big driver for this was like, let's show people what it might look like.
Yeah, I mean, this again, we should give a lot of credit to Jet for doing the math behind this and coming with the idea. And what it really does, and what I love so much about it, is it does show the diversity of the cube world. The result is you see this map of all these dots spread out, but there's also, it's not evenly spread out. There's all these sort of clusters.
Yeah.
And each of those clusters ends up sort of representing some kind of theme of cube design.
Right.
And that is, the diversity of the themes itself is kind of mind-boggling. There's, each set will tend to sort of form a little cluster. The major kind of archetypes of the powered vintage cube and the pauper cubes and peasant cubes form little continents. But then beyond that, you see artifact themes that maybe are close to Kamagama Dynasty or Mirrodin cubes are kind of clustered in there. And then this little cluster of cubes that are just built around only one mana spells or all kinds of other design restrictions. So it does paint this really clear and cool picture of how diverse the cube world is. That is really hard to see if you're just browsing the top cards on CubeCover or top cubes on CubeCover.
And you can see the MTGO Vintage Cube. It's there, and it's in the middle of an enormous continent. I mean, there's a lot of cubes that are very much like that, but then you can also see this whole diversity in the space, like you all are describing. And it's a beautiful representation too. You can zoom in and out on the map. It's almost like I remember playing with programs that generated fractals procedurally when I was a kid, and you could like zoom in and zoom in and zoom in on the fractal image. It's got some of that joy of exploration and wonder as you're diving into the
I've
space.
spent so many hours just zooming in and out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I don't want to give us too much credit, but I've been really active in the cube discussion internet community for the better part of 5-ish years now. And when I first got involved, I felt like I saw a ton of this presumed context. We're talking about cube, and it's like, well, obviously we're talking about cube, and cube is this, and this is essentially a vintage cube, a vintage unpowered or powered cube. And you would hear people say things like, well, every cube has this, like you have to have this in your cube or whatever. And I think the most powerful way to like change the discussion around that, I don't think we see it as much anymore, is just to like have this thing that you can so plainly see that's not true, right? You can argue with people in the comments all you want and say, actually, I have this cube and I have that cube and I have a friend that has this cube, and so I have 3 anecdotal evidences that you're wrong. You can just actually have this thing to point to, which ultimately what I would like, I think our goal as like a mission statement for Lucky Paper, if such a thing could exist, is just to make this world more accessible to more kinds of players.
Right.
Because I see all the time, right? Like, we make an effort to like post things we make on the internet and like solicit feedback from people. I all the time see people that assume like, oh, well, Cube is about this, and I don't want to play with power, or I think Storm is dumb, and they just assume that Cube's not for them because what they know of Cube is what they see on Magic Online or what they see streamers playing. And so what I want is to bring these people in and say, no, this is the way to play this game however you want. Whatever you love most about this game can be manifested here more than any other place inherently.
Right, and it's critically not that Cube has to be this like weird, complicated space, and it has to be not the vintage Cube. No, it's just that nothing else can be this other thing. There's no other way to play Magic. You have the flexibility really to play with any cards you want, and still play, in a competitive mindset if that's what you want. So I really value that about Cube.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think in one way we could sort of think a little bit about what used to be the top cube on Cube Tutor, which was, again, moving from nothing. It's a bunch of people with random spreadsheets.
So by top cube, you mean the average cube?
Yeah, sorry, correct.
They had average ones for each size.
That sort of showed if you took all of the most popular cubes and kind of averaged them together, this is kind of what the core cube looks like.
Yeah,
if you took all your favorite meals and averaged them together, it would be a brown slop.
Yeah,
I'd try it once.
540 most cubed cards.
Right, and that was
all of the cubes on Cube 2.
Exactly, and that was extremely valuable because we were going from nothing, and now we had this sense of this is what Cube is, and we can talk about it now.
Yeah.
And the Cube map is almost like taking that single point of this is what Cube looks like and blowing it out into 2 dimensions. And we don't see everything. We've lost, 20,800 minus 2 dimensions. But going to 2 is still a huge increase. And now you can see that there's not just this one archetype of what Cube is, but there are hundreds of different clusters. And just being able to show somebody, like you're saying, hey, you're interested in making an enchantment cube, you're interested in making an artifact cube, here is this place on the map you can look, and there's going to be a ton of inspiration for that, and a ton of just validation of other people are also interested in doing this. And I think that's what the map has done that's been most productive and positive to me.
Yeah,
and that average cube list, too, is something I think about all the time, because I ultimately think that decision by Ben was destructive to the kind of cube community I want, right? Like, I think it makes people... It reinforces this assumption this is what cube is, right? Like I clicked on top average cube and here's the cube that I assume cube to be, so obviously that's what it is. I honestly think the impetus to make that page came from a presumption that, oh, us cube designers are trying to make the best, most powerful environment we can. Right. But that said, I used to use that thing all the time 5 years ago. Because I was new to this and I needed anything to grab onto. I was like, I don't play constructed. I don't know what kinds of cards are good or people like playing with. And so I needed anything to sink my teeth into to get started. Yeah. And that being such an accessible starting point, ultimately could have gotten a lot more people into cube design that we could have had a much more complicated, more thorough, more in like our philosophy of cube design tool. But if it's too hard to get access to, if it's not easy to just like sit down and immediately understand, then the people that are like passingly interested, maybe I'll try this, they're just going to fall off. And so if, as a marketing initiative, it's interesting to try and strike this balance of how do we cultivate the kind of cube world we want in a way that is still accessible, because what we want is this thing that is, you can't describe it. What is cube? It's everything. Yeah. And so that's not very compelling. Like, you want to build a cube? What is it? It's anything you want. Well, what do I want?
It's the blank page problem. It's like,
yeah. So anyway, like that I think about that all the time, because I would never make that decision if I were thinking about it now and I was in Gwen's shoes or whatever, for example. I think I know why I made the decision, but ultimately it was like also the most accessible way. It was like, here is a cube.
Well,
hey,
just to say, that sort of information is still available on Cube Cobra. We can see what green cards are the most included in cubes.
Yeah, but this is where like the small decisions about the presentation of information, which is what I'm so passionate about, make a huge difference.
Right.
Like, yes, you could find
on the front page, here's the average.
And it's not labeled average cube, it's labeled top cards. It's essentially the same thing, but I think you're right, that label.
And the fact that it's not visible, you can't go to one page that has it all, right? It's not a cube, it's these like separate pieces. Like you still have to do work to like make that list and combine it. Yeah. Like, I don't know. I suspect that way fewer people on average look at the top cards by color and like look at popularity compared to looking at the average cube on Cube Tutor. Right. And we saw when Cube Tutor shut down, that was the one thing everyone requested. They were like, I used to go to that page all the time. What happened to it? We heard a lot of people in different, like on the Reddit, were just like, I need the average Cube Tutor list back. I used to refer to it all the time. Like what's the equivalent now? And it's like, well, there isn't, but if you like put a little more in, you can get so much more out of it.
Yeah. Well, so if you're a cube designer, what are some of the analytical tools, or what are some of the ways of conceptualizing your cube in terms of data that are accessible to you and that are right now, that don't live in some dream world where you get, playtesting data from tens of thousands of repetitions of your cube or something like this. But what are some of your go-tos for the kinds of information that you can learn about your cube now and help that to make decisions about the design?
I mean, we have a bunch of different resources. I mean, the cube map, I think, is a great one, and it has a lot of different uses. I think that just this idea of showing the diversity is very powerful, as well as if you are already sort of focused in one particular space, it's a great way to sort of zoom in and see what other cubes are similar to yours and use that as a source of inspiration. I think almost more important than that is Cube Cobra, sort of the premier cube website, just has some very basic analytics and some pretty advanced analytics if you want to dig into it, but a lot of, the 80% is solved by the 20% of the options, right?
Okay.
Or maybe I'm getting that backwards, but just having these basic tools of I can show a bar graph of the distribution of different colors of different mana costs in my cube. Those can really help you answer some fundamental questions, especially once you start to add some qualitative experience to that as well. So if I've played two different cubes and I think this one is maybe a little too fast for me, this one's a little too slow, I can then look at those histograms of how different aspects of the cube break down and try and find some pattern and find some in between. Or another thing that I think is super useful is looking at the mana curve of your cube and then looking at kind of the mana curve of the decks that you like to draft and like to play, and kind of try and roughly match that in order to make those kinds of decks easily draftable. So I just think that those basic breakdowns, histograms, are some of the most useful things you can find.
Okay, that's awesome. That's good.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most useful tool for a first-time cube designer, or for somebody who, is curious about expanding on the Magic Online cube or the Arena cube. I think Cube Cobra is a great place to start that analytics tab there. Now there is another tool which we've talked about before, or just finished talking about, the cube map, which situates your cube in the landscape of all possible or all existent cubes on Cube Cobra, and that can be a great way to find your nearest neighbors. So Andy and our cubes are kind of near on the cube map, and so sometimes I visit his list for some inspiration. Same thing with John's list. And that can be another useful, I think, tool for designers or first-time designers as well.
I'll be honest, I don't use any of those tools to aid me in cube design. The one thing I use that kind of fits into this camp on Cube Cobra is the compare cubes tool. Put in my list, put in another list, and I feel like that's the equivalent of a qualitative analysis, right? I'm not looking at numbers really. I'm just looking at roughly how many of these do you have? I can see that you have a couple more black removal spells than I do. I'm just getting kind of an impression, or maybe I'm seeing specific cards that are included or excluded in one list or the other. But I find that much more helpful to me than looking at my mana curve or looking at one of these histograms. Because something we haven't said is that this is part of that bias that numbers have, right? We have numbers. It's easy to put it into a histogram. Why not do that? It's great, we can. Is actually looking at a mana curve going to speak to the speed of an environment? In some ways, maybe. In a lot of ways, maybe not. And so it's very hard to actually, it's a lot of work to look at that and actually derive meaningful intuition about how that should actually be applied. And I find it so much easier to just kind of skip the middleman and just be show me the list, right? I don't need to see an abstraction of it. Let me look at the actual cards and to compare it to another list that I want to compare it to for whatever reason. I did this for the cubes I'm doing commentary on this weekend, right? Because I know my cube very well, probably the cube I know the best. And so if that's my baseline, I want to see, all right, put in the other list and what are the big differences here? What are the big deltas we notice, and be aware of those changes in my assumed context and what this environment might actually play like.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of comparing is super critical, because you can't just look at those histograms and say, oh, this histogram looks wrong, because what is wrong? It's just a bunch of numbers. So
but so many people do that, though, because you have some assumption of what it should look like, and if it doesn't match your assumption, you say it looks wrong. And then you try and massage the data until it looks like what you expect, and that's not...
Right. I mean, there are some obvious ways that you can say, things that sound natural, you have, in this color, there's a gap in your mana curve here. That seems wrong, but maybe that color is all about ramping at that certain point. So you actually want fewer spells at that point, at that particular point in the mana curve. So I agree that what's more important is like the explanation behind things and the stories and comparing things and putting that into a qualitative and perceptual context. But once you have your foot into what the experience is and have a baseline, then I definitely think that these become super useful. I mean, especially, you know, maybe not just comparing two cubes, but think about one cube over time. You know, I lowered the curve here this much, and this is actually my experience with these different ways that these sort of curves look like.
So now you're getting to the kind of tools I really want, right?
Okay.
Because
let's look into the future.
There's two features of Cube Cover that I think are fantastic. I mean, there's a lot, but the two I like the most. The compare tool is really useful. I use that all the time as a designer. The other thing I'm so glad that Ben from Cube Tutor did, and then Gwen and Cube Cobra inherited, is the like version control model of updating the cube. Like decklist websites, like Moxfield or whatever, you just make changes and it just changes. And it's like, well, I want to like commit this change. I want to like write a little bit about why I did it. That is so valuable because what I think we could do a better job of in terms of communicating some sort of data about Cube is helping individual designers understand their own path through their own cube over time. And that's, again, the environment you're most familiar with. So understanding how these changes might have contributed to this different play experience you're having. You know, something I've always wanted and I could make for myself, but it's time consuming and I haven't gotten around to it. It's just, I want a timeline of every single card that's ever been in my cube with like here's the date I put it in, here's the date I put it out. In some cases, here's the date I put it in again, took it out again, and put it in again, and took it out again. Cool. And just like be able to see what are the cards that have been in my cube since day one, 4.5 years ago, right? Like it's Lightning Bolt, Counterspell. I'm sure there's a handful of others, but I don't think it's that long of a list. And then what are the ones that have been in there the longest or coming in and out? What were the biggest changes that kind of went through that? Having it like that kind of reflection on your own journey. And I love a cube as a like manifestation of your relationship to the game. Like it's not a fixed thing. It's tempting to think about it as an artifact, like a thing that is completed, like a creative work, and then you walk away from it.
Which I mean, I'll push back. It definitely can be that.
It can be.
Think, you know, think about set cubes or ideas.
Yeah, that's true.
I played this set, I loved it, I want to put it away and keep it. And I think that a lot of people also have, you know, Justin Parnell was talking about designing the SUG 20K cube, and that he hasn't changed that since. Like that is an artifact of this was the cube for this event, and I think that's actually also very cool.
It is,
go back and experience that.
You got this little, you got a cube that's frozen in time, like you know, in amber, and you can see this artifact of the past. I like that a lot.
But that's definitely different from your experience of the way.
I think for those of us that are like, I think that is true. But a lot of people are also like, they have a cube and they're like always changing it and evolving it with their preferences and play styles and their play group. And I think a better like understanding of the journey you've been on and how that journey has affected the end result. Like, you know what your cube plays like, you know that it used to play like this and now it plays like this. What does it actually look like? Like the same way that we can like show you what the cube map looks like. What does the timeline of that look like? Where were the big changes? I think that kind of reflection would help inform future decisions in a more clear way. We talked about this idea of boiled frogs on the podcast before, which is like a card that you just kind of didn't realize had like gotten out of place and it's just been there for a long time and you never like it never flagged that it should be cut to you, and then one day you realize like, wait a minute, this card doesn't make any sense here. If this card was printed in a set today, I would never put it in. Like it's just kind of stuck around. I think things like that become easier to identify if you have a better sense of your own.
That's true.
Changing design perceptions.
Why more eyes on your cube can be extremely useful too. You get an outsider's perspective on it. It's like, what in the world is that card doing here? You know? On your point about tracking cube changes through time, Gwen, I know, is talking about instituting an ability to look at your cube at particular points in time, like a snapshot of your cube in the
That'd
year.
Be fantastic.
Pop back to a version,
in May of 2019.
And also, if you could draft it too, that would be sick. If you could actually run a simulated draft.
Yeah, but then like charting this progression in some way, like you're describing, sounds really cool too.
And part of why I think this is valuable is that we have a podcast about cube design. So because we have to make episodes, we need topics. Like we have occasionally been like, well, this is an interesting question. Let's go answer it for ourselves. Like, let's go see what my cube looked like 12 months ago and like how my removal density has changed. And the answers always surprise us. We're like, what? That changed in that way? Like, even though we're incredibly engaged in this creative practice, it's still a thing where it's like, I had no idea because this is not visible to me. I don't see this anywhere. And so unless I'm intentionally going back,
checking those bar graphs,
checking all of the like changed the change logs, the cards in, cards out, making a note of it in like a spreadsheet or whatever, and then comparing it. That's the only way I get that sort of hindsight perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that would be, in many ways, some of the most valuable analysis we could offer to people is like make that hindsight more visible, make this journey you've been on a more visible thing so that you can learn from it.
I think a big part of that is just that when we are changing our cubes, as a lot of us do over time, we're often making it in very small sort of incremental changes where we're thinking about a couple cards. We're thinking about, oh, this new set adds a couple, like this theme, or, powers up my removal a little bit. We aren't often seeing it in aggregate. So, yeah, I think that all of these just sort of add up to the more we can both at the same time see the forest and the trees, like zoom in and zoom out and get this big sense while we're also appreciating all the details, the more that we can just be in control and make informed decisions. Although, again, ultimately, all of this data is only as important as the play experience and are you actually having a good time with it.
Well, I like hearing about some of these ideas that you have for other ways of visualizing a cube, other information that you'd like to have more accessible about your cube. I wonder, as we move towards wrapping up our awesome panel here, if each of you might speculate about the kind of data that if you had your druthers, you would love access to. What would be the most useful kind of data that maybe you don't have now, but could be awesome? And what could you do with that data? How could you make some practical use of it?
I can go first. I would love to have access to my playgroup's perception of my cube without having to bother them or like ask them to fill out some survey at the end of every draft. Like, that's the kind of thing I want.
Very aspirational. You want,
it's not possible. I mean, like, I want to be in their brains. Like, no, but like, some cube designers do that. They have a post-draft survey. They ask all their players to fill out, and I admire that. But the way we play our cubes, I'm never going to ask people to do it, right? It's not going to happen.
Right.
But that's what I want to know most, right? Because again, all this like math and statistics and analytics, like that's cool, but what I really care about is what does everyone really think about Uro? Like, I know sometimes it's a groaner. Like, how many people really deep down are like, I just wish I never saw this card in this cube because it like ruins the evening for me, versus people that are just groaning about it because they just lost. Because I mean, that's the other thing is even qualitatively, you get a lot of tainted data, right? Someone just lost to a card. They're like, that card's too good. I don't like it. Get it out of here. It's like, well, you know, that's one data point and you're in a little emotional space right now because you lost to it. So maybe sleep on it and then come back to me. That's what I want. Yeah. And I don't think it's anything that's going to happen anytime soon until we, you know, I can't imagine a path to collecting that data in any kind of automated way, but that's what I would most want, because I would most want to be cutting things that my players didn't find fun. And I think that's what I want to know most.
Well, I'm gonna jump in on this point as well, since you mentioned considering what people think about Uro and so on, getting the real insight into this.
I'm gonna jump in here and say Uro sucks. Get it out of your cube.
I have opinions about Uro. No, it could well be that data might be at odds with player experience in a way that whereby we might want to pay attention to the data, but we also might want to reject the data and say that the player experience, even if it doesn't align with the data, could be more important to us.
Right. Well, I think what Andy's suggesting is sort of this like getting player perception as data. So, you know, imagine a far-flung future where we're all playing on video screens and we have facial tracking cameras that actually are determining our emotions with machine
Everyone's
learning.
wearing a mood ring, but the mood ring works, and also the mood ring is recording data every 1 second throughout the draft.
Well, look, I've got an example of this. So I had the rare opportunity to get all this data from WotC about people playing the Cultic Cube on MTGO 2 years ago, and one component of the data was we could see a relationship between a card being in a main deck and the player's results, the player's match wins, right, when they include that card in the main deck. So Oko was in this cube. Oko was a shiny new card at the time, and the data showed that in this particular environment, this needn't be true anywhere else, but Oko was sort of middle of the pack of planeswalkers, if we isolated planeswalkers, and how often main decking Oko led to match wins. So it wasn't an extraordinarily dominant card. It didn't appear.
But it feels awful.
It feels, yeah, exactly, right. So there were people who were sort of excited that like Oko felt beatable here. That's great. But then there were also, I got a lot of feedback from a lot of people about what a miserable card Oko is. And you know what? I cut Oko from that environment ultimately because, you know, I'm not going to argue with people about here are the receipts. Oko isn't as good here as you might think it is. Yeah. If people are miserable playing Oko, then
And that's such a good example too of how, even in your case, like you are probably one of a rarefied air of cube designers that actually has anything resembling statistically significant data about an environment you design, right? Almost nobody gets access to that. And even with that, we can come up with plenty of plausible explanations for why Oko would have a lower win percentage. Like maybe players knew it was really good and somebody took it and splashed it greedily in decks where they couldn't cast it. Or, there's all kinds of explanations we can come up with that wouldn't indicate that result is actually indicative of Oko being a mid-tier card and actually not being that good. And you're in like the best possible case scenario for like actually getting meaningful data out of your cube. And even then it's like, well, does it actually mean anything, or does it just mean that blue-green was a bad deck? And so Oko was the only good card in that deck, and it couldn't carry the whole day, right? It was just losing to much more consistent red-white decks or whatever. There's so many variables that it's like almost impossible to isolate.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I don't know, Parker, do you have thoughts about what, in your dream world, what would you like to learn and how would you use that knowledge?
So in the sciences, we use toy models very frequently. So let's say you want to simulate an earthquake. That is plate tectonics. You can't simulate every atom. That would just, take more computing power than there is silicon in the world to make computer chips with. But we can simplify it, make a toy model. We can make a simulation that drags a few atoms over another few atoms, and there we can derive insights. I would want such a model for Magic. If you change a mana curve in such a way, how does that change the play experience? How does that change the length of games? How does that change, the likelihood of top decking? I would want a way to link. In other words, I would want to skip play testing. I would want to be able to predict what effect a change would have on my environment.
Awesome.
While we're aspiring.
That's a great answer, I think. I mean, ultimately, that's what we're all trying to do is like enact a certain gameplay experience. And to go back to the like artist metaphor, if you told a musician, like, I can tell you exactly what emotion someone is going to feel when they listen to this album with these lyrics, you might see musicians like actually like min-maxing their albums and being like, no, I want to create this feeling in people. And right now I'm failing in some way. I'm going to tweak this language. I'm going to tweak this chord, make it a little more minor or whatever. If you had this like sandbox environment where you could just simulate reality in a somewhat faithful way.
Awesome. Anthony, what have you got? What's your dream?
I feel like someone should stand up for the baseline obvious thing, although I appreciate his aspirations that all the data that we do have is basically just on how people are designing their cubes. We're looking at the list of cards that people have made and put on Cube Cobra, and that is extremely valuable data and tells us about what the cube community is like. But that's all it tells us. So just having playtest data of what are the game wins, what is the, basically having 17 lands for all of your cubes for perhaps simulated or perhaps even better real group of people playing it would just be incredible data. Again, how we apply that data is really difficult and complicated because your goal isn't necessarily, well, maybe my goal is just to make White Man Lion the most powerful card, and I could do that with that data. But my goal is probably to just make people happy with the environment. So I want that data, but maybe that's not actually best for me.
Right, fair enough. That's great. Well, have we come to a conclusion, gentlemen?
I think so. Put a bow on it, John. Bring it home.
Okay. Bring it home. All right. Awesome. That's a heavy responsibility.
No pressure.
I think that we can use both intuition and data, artistry and experience as ways of making our cubes still better. No, I don't know. I'm being sort of frivolous here, but I think that you all are doing really awesome and innovative work in taking data whose very existence is sort of awesome and innovative and is, only recently something that we've had access to. And I've loved the ways that you all have pushed towards making that data interesting, making that data useful, making that data beautiful in all sorts of different ways. So it's been a pleasure talking with you all about this and talking about your project. So thank you all so much.
And thank you for everything you do too for the Cube community. Pillar of the community.
We're so excited to be here and so excited to be here at CubeCon. And
you've got a lot of great videos, John, but this is maybe the best thing you've had a hand in putting together.
CubeCon. It's All right. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Remove the backpack, Michael.